Welcome, everybody, to the show. And we've managed to lose Seth somehow during the intro video. Welcome, everybody, from the sun-dappled Ardwulf's Lair Studios here in Columbus, Ohio. Wait, is it sunny? No, never mind. Not sunny. So we're here today with some folks from Invicta Rex Games, and we're going to talk about their upcoming product, Song for War. Now, let me introduce this a little bit because they were pretty close to us. They had a table set up with this setup pretty close to where we were doing stuff at Origins this past fall. And I was like, ooh, look at this. And I talked to them and they sent me some emails about setting something up. And none of that came together due 100% to my own ineptitude in keeping track of emails, which I am terrible at. So thank you, Brant, for getting this finally happening at this late hour. So I'll give you guys a chance, Chris and Seth, to introduce yourselves and Invicta Rex Games and what you folks are all about.
I appreciate that. That's a great opportunity to be with you today. And yeah, it was when we first crossed paths at Origins, and I think the fact that it took Brant to get us together, I think, is a wonderful thing, which we're grateful for the opportunity. So I'm Chris Helm from Invicta Rex Games. I think what's interesting about this is I think a lot of the origins of where we really started was, you grow up a gamer, you spend a lot of time gaming, and throughout all of those years, you keep thinking, boy, wouldn't it be nice if this mechanic did X? Or wouldn't it be nice if we could do Y? Or wouldn't it be nice if this setting were particularly here? And so you just sort of stuff all that in your mental file over a few decades, and then you get to the point and said, well, why don't we actually try to make a game that we thought could be a bit innovative, a bit different in terms of its mechanics and feel. And so that's really was the origins of a lot of this. I think Seth will probably say the same thing. I think with a lot of us, we cut our teeth in wargaming in the 80s. Axis and Allies and a lot of other different games, of course, that was sort of the origins that brought us to this initially, and sort of was the basis of how do we create a sense of fun in a theater-based, strategy-based tabletop game over the course of a good evening is kind of the basis of us to get it started. Seth.
Right. So my name is Seth Stigliano. Chris, you summed it up very well. I'm an engineer, so communication skills are not my forte. But I will be here for support wherever you need me, Chris.
I appreciate that. The fact that I work at a global accounting and auditing firm doesn't necessarily make me ready to rumble, but we'll give it a shot.
Okay, so your guys, is it as a publisher, as Invicta Rex is Song for War going to be your first offering? Is that
it is indeed? You are correct, sir.
Okay,
yep.
And you guys are planning a Kickstarter or crowdfunding type campaign in the near future?
We are. This would be a 2022 endeavor, hopefully sooner in 2022 rather than later. Ideally spring. If not, we'll probably do it shortly after.
So one of the things that I thought was super interesting when I looked at the game was it's the Mediterranean theater specifically, which is actually really kind of a neat situation because you have the opportunity to have two Axis factions, right? Without those factions necessarily being wildly imbalanced like they would be if you were covering the entire European war, for example, where the Italians are definitely a second fiddle power. As far as the Med's concerned, they're really not. They have a very powerful navy. They were very active, possibly not as competent as they could possibly have been, but nevertheless, they're a significant participant in those actions. So can we talk a little bit about the background of why you chose the Mediterranean theater in particular, and maybe give us some perspective on the way the different factions balance and interact?
Absolutely. I mean, happy to answer that. That obviously took a lot of early attention in terms of to get this balance. I think when you look at different theaters or different settings, in terms of the war game world, we just thought, of course, there's some classics based in sort of the Mediterranean theater in general, but there was not a lot that we had found that holistically took a look at the theater and took a look at, particularly around late 1942, sort of prior to Operation Torch, and running through 43 with Husky in Sicily, and then making its way up through Italy. And so when we sort of looked at the options about where to put the setting, the first was, well, we would really like a good balance of land, sea, and air. So what's going to give us the opportunity to have the right balance, make the game more fun, simply by incorporating all the three different types of forces, number one. And number two, what we had found to be unexplored. The Mediterranean theater fit that. yet was still obviously integral to the prosecution and the victory around the war, particularly in the, creating the Southern Front in the European theater. And what was also interesting about it is, just like you said, Gary, I mean, historically, Italy is going to be an addendum to whatever type of gameplay you're going to have in a lot of games. But when you talk about the Mediterranean theater and you discuss 1942 and late 1942, I mean, the Italians had a pretty strong navy at that point. Mm-hmm. The fact that we know Mussolini was, of course, trying to catch up and try to be, make as much of a footprint for Italy as he could in step with, German advances, puts Italy in a very interesting position, because now when we have the axis of Germany and Italy in control of the vast majority of the theater in the fall of 42, when you're looking at, basically the only thing the Allies had at that point prior to the landing, right, by the Americans was, Malta was continually hanging on by a thread. Alexandria, of course, was a strong base of operations, right? And then Gibraltar, which is far on the western side of the Mediterranean. Other than that, it was an Axis-controlled environment. And so the game sets you up in this scenario at that point. There's really two pieces of the scenarios. One is late 42 and one is 43, depending on how long of an evening you want. But you make a valid point. One is we thought it was unexplored. Two, we thought it really introduced Italy into the mix and brought almost a very balanced 2 to 4 person game into it by using the Mediterranean.
Great. Yeah, it's. I think there's actually not that much in the space, and I realize I have to fix the title of the video, because somehow the video's got, we're all in the correct stream on StreamYard, but we're streaming to the incorrect stream on YouTube. So this is I think a YouTube problem. So if anybody's in the wrong stream, let me just throw a link. We're not going to start over.
Somebody's either really excited or very disappointed.
Yeah, so I don't know how many people we got going. We got watching now. It's only 6 people, but it's also 10 a.m. on Saturday morning, and it's earlier than that in anybody west of here. So, so that could be why
this isn't about baking recipes. I'm sorry.
This is not, nor is it makeup videos. There are channels for that if you want. So, be my guest. It's a free country, right?
Yeah, right.
So there's not, like I was trying to say before I got distracted by the fact that everything's broken behind the scenes. There's not really that much stuff in the Mediterranean that's not like just a sideshow to another game. You've got the old Med Front from Columbia Games, for example, but that's kind of an add-on to East Front and West Front, and you don't even need it anymore with the current edition. You have Struggle for Europe from Clash of Arms, which has an add-on to add the Mediterranean to the game. It's kind of included in War in Europe. But again, it's kind of a side light. It's always kind of been considered sort of this thing that we kind of tack on because we kind of have to handle North Africa into a strategic or operational level World War II game without necessarily getting to shine as a theater, which it is, right? We have a lot of so you said there's a couple of different scenarios. When do those campaigns start and end?
Well, the longer term scenario, depending on time you want to spend, and it's all in one evening. It just depends on what you'd rather do. Starts right in November of 1942, right before Operation Torch begins, and we can take a look at some visuals in a bit if you're so interested.
Sure.
But it starts us off right with we incorporated a mechanic which took a lot of. A good thing we don't get paid on time served, because if we considered how long it took to think about a proper hidden fleet mechanic, that took a while. But it allows the U.S. to have a hidden fleet. It creates a fog of war notion, because what would be Operation Torch in the fall of 1942 if Hitler wasn't worried if it wasn't Sardinia, Corsica, right where this is going? So we had to build that into the gaming experience, especially for the history buffs on the line. So it starts late 1942. The U.S. has a hidden fleet. It has a small footprint in Algiers at the time. And the British are really the ones primarily doing the fighting in the theater at that point, right? This is the first opportunity of the U.S. to actually get into real fighting in the war. Right. This is the first time they were any, blooded, if you were. So meanwhile, the British are holding on. They have Alexandria, but Alexandria is very strong from a military standpoint. They're obviously very concerned about protecting the Suez and what that gives them. They really put a lot of supplies around the Cape of Good Hope rather than going across the Mediterranean. But so Alexandria, Malta hanging on by a thread in the middle, Gibraltar, and then the U.S. sort of just entering the fray is the longer fall of 42. And then when you start in 43, which is probably about a 4-hour game, it's more of the summer of 43. It's Tunisia. We're in the throes of Tunisia. The Battle of Kasserine Pass has happened. The Germans are busy trying to build, get the land bridge and bring things back over to Italy, but still Tunis is holding on strong. And so the British have made their way west across North Africa. Meanwhile, the U.S. are making their way east. And so they put you right at the position of the summer of 43 before Tunisia. But Tunisia's no easy slog if you're going to take it in the 43 campaign.
So what, on that subject, what are some of the challenges so we presume that both sides are going to have, there's going to be some push and pull from both sides. Both sides are going to get the opportunity to be offensive and to be defensive. So what are some of the strategic and operational challenges that each of those four factions face?
Interesting. Well, absolutely. And this is built into, of course, to the mechanics of the game. I think some of the challenges, so, from the Axis side of the field, I mean, they were at this point, things were about to turn, right? Yet we all know that they had a lot of advantages. First of all, they had incredible leadership, right? If anyone can do a counter move, Rommel was in Tunisia, right? Kesselring was in Italy. And you're talking about incredible leadership at the time and the ability that they are going to do a stage retreat, they're going to make you pay for it. So, the advantages of that the Germans had strong position. They had a lot of the high ground at the time. Tunisia was no easy push. I think I read an Omar Bradley's biography. He talked about, I think it was putting this Hill 109 or something. He talks about just the difficulty of unseating the Germans in Tunisia at the time because of their intelligence, because of their position, because of the units that they had there. And one thing that the Axis have at advantage is they still control much of the theater, right? So the ability to move about the theater is really an advantage over the Allies. What the Allies had was just momentum and frankly a ton of stuff. I mean, they were well supplied, well thought out, and they were able to really just continue to just through sheer momentum and sheer investment of time and effort of resources make it work, even though it wasn't the most efficient execution, frankly. And of course, we try to build some of that into the gameplay, whether that's resupply values, whether that's starting units, whether that's the type of units, upgrades, or all the different things that come into play that give the Axis an advantage versus the Allies at the time.
Mm-hmm. And another interesting thing is, as I think we've got some folks alluding to in the chat now that we finally have some people here. Thank you, YouTube. But I feel like it's not a North Africa game, right? Which is kind of another thing that the Mediterranean theater gets to be kind of a tacked on piece in North Africa games. We're actually playing a North Africa game right now, Europa of all goddamn things. And, we've got this very Baroque harnessed on set of mechanisms for handling things like Malta and sea transport and air interdiction over the Med and stuff like that. And so the opportunity to handle the Mediterranean as a distinct theater is, I think, very interesting. One of the only things I could think of in this space is there's a Decision Games magazine game called Mare Nostrum. Have you guys seen that?
I'm familiar with it. It's also an event in our game, absolutely, because the Italians, right? Yep.
Yeah, and it's one of the more highly regarded S&T games from the last, I think it was in S&T, from say the last 15 years or so. It goes for like $200 when I've seen it, but I've also seen it, on tables too, which is relatively unusual. So do you guys have a set target for the Kickstarter, or are you just kind of, is that still a moving piece?
In all honesty, it's a moving piece. Ideally, we'd like to figure out spring. We've got to get a little things lined up. The pandemic does not make this easy, unfortunately. And I know no one's shocked at that. But that would be ideal. If not, certainly in 2022, maybe more toward the summertime, depending on the flow of what happens externally in the market and what we think happens there. But Gary, if you want to, from a theater standpoint, we can show some visuals of what the theater looks like, what the board.
Yeah, let's do that. And then, do you guys have any convention appearances that you intend to make over the next several months?
We do. There's a couple. Well, we both live in Ohio. We're both based in Ohio as well. Gary, I'm a Cleveland guy.
Oh, okay. I'm from Cleveland originally, so
There we go. Love it. And Seth, we're both originally from Youngstown, so we're
I'd
both
say go Browns, but I don't have a bag to put on my head.
Yeah.
So.
Probably. So there's a couple of local things going up for some of the meetups and the gaming that's happening for the East Side gamers and Cleveland side, and we're exploring doing connections as well coming up in a few months, and we'll probably do a few others.
Okay, great. Yeah,
but you guys in the summer.
What's that, Seth? Sorry.
So definitely Origins in the summer. I know it's a way off.
100%.
Yeah. Well, if you guys are in Ohio, there's no reason not to show up at Origins, right?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
I'll also point out that we have Buckeye Game Fest coming in April, which is down here in Columbus as well. If you guys saw the Hyatt, which is attached to the convention center last time, you guys probably know this already. It's in the Hyatt, right? Yep. So it's pretty much the same location at Origins. It's just where the RPG stuff at Origins happens. That's where Buckeye Game Fest happens.
Right.
So if you guys, we should make a point to talk about that actually, because I'd sure like to have you guys at Buckeye Game Fest.
I'd love to come to that. And I'll tell you what, one of the things that, for all of you, whoever might be watching this from a design standpoint, you got to have thick skin, but I love people playing the game, pointing out, flaws, being tough on it. So what works, what doesn't, because, working all that out. So we'd love to come and put it to the test there.
So let me, on that subject, let me ask, how close are you guys to saying, okay, we're putting a bow on it at this point, we're done? Or are you guys still in, halfway through playtesting, 2/3 of the way through playtesting?
I'd say, what do you think, Seth? I think we're pretty much through it. I think it's one of those things too, where, if you keep doing it, you'll keep finding little things here and there, but by and large, I mean, it's held up, no fatal flaws. It feels very strong, little tweaks here and there, but by and large, we're through it, Seth. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would agree. We could do development forever. I think just tweaking the knobs and changing things here and there. But I agree. I think we're probably a good, 95% there, and done with development and just on to finalize play testing and whatnot.
Right, and you can trust the engineer on that one better than the.
So we can expect to see liberal applications of duct tape throughout the game.
Duct tape and baling wire is how it's all put together.
That's right. If you're going to take the word of one of us. Don't take mine.
So let's see some photos, because what you notice right away walking past the thing at Origins is, hey, for playtest components, this thing looks pretty good.
Thank you. So sharing the screen, I'll just share my whole screen, right?
Yeah, that's fine. And then I'll add it.
Okay.
And then I'll see if I can get StreamYard to cooperate, which would be great.
And then you'll basically need to see my screen. Is that correct?
We're already there.
Beautiful. Okay. So let me just flip down. There's the intro. So this gives you a sense of if you can see this. Okay.
Yep.
This gives you a sense. Thank you. This is awesome. This is the components. This is what you saw at Origins. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, the game is. Remind me of the size, Seth. Map size.
So it's 54 by 31 inches.
54 by 31 inches. So not a small map. It's going to have a lot of characteristics of it that I think would sort of evoke or elicit, times of yesteryear, I think, for a lot of us in terms of how we play these games. But as you can see, the point you made, Gary, is that when we look at the theater, and probably next slide even does better, if you take a look at the entire theater, it's not just a North Africa game. The objective in order to win the theater, fundamentally, of any war, is to win objectives and key points on the map, right, and on the board itself. The colored spaces you see there are some of the core objectives that were part of the campaign and part of the time period, right? Algiers, Bizerte, Tunis, Palermo, up into Naples, Rome is up in Toronto, Athens. And so the way this is built is designed to open up the entire theater for the game. This is not an incremental game. This is not where you move slowly and go one space and take one. This allows you to really move about the theater, and the mechanics allow you to move about the theater to take these objectives. Which ones you take and how you reach the victory threshold, it can vary, right? And that's part of the fun of the game, is the replay values. As we've seen people win by making their way up through Italy, we've seen people win making their way by strictly across all of North Africa, and then picking off points here and there in order to control the theater, some through the Balkans. But you have to be aggressive, and you have to think big across the theater and the map in order to do it. But to your point, this is not a North African game by nature. It's the full theater at play.
That's great. We've got a question from the viewers. Does the game have surrender rules for Italy and Vichy France? I would assume that the answer to that is probably yes.
I mean, it does. What we've done, and that's something that's funny of all things you ask about, right? Because we're always thinking about, well, when Italy surrenders, what does that do for game flow, right? Historically, right? Now, we're not fully tied necessarily to chronology. Once the game starts, I would say, I got the question last night, we call them stages, the full turns of the clock, right? How long is a stage? Because there's about 6 total in the long game. And stages are about, I guess, 4 to 6 months in real time if I were to align it. The way we've worked that in is particularly the Italian surrender, I thought was a little more material, obviously, to this whole process, is we've worked that in through different types of event cards that can happen and that can be played. That would be an allied event card in this case, which would have obviously deleterious impacts on the Axis efforts if you were to play it, is how we work this in. We didn't build it in necessarily to like, okay, you're in stage 4, now this clicks. We thought about that and didn't do that. We left that more of as an event basis.
So on that topic, because this is a question that folks are going to ask, and if I don't ask you guys, then people are going to ask me, and I'll be like, we've already mentioned that there are cards. So what is the mechanism by which cards affect the game? Would we characterize this as a card-driven game or merely card-assisted?
It's card assisted. So I think that's a great question as well, which I'll get into for a second. It's card assisted. I think philosophically, the way we've approached this, and Seth help me out here, Gary, is that look, when we think of the word strategy and tabletop, all right, just let me get to this for a second, is it's really about more of a business definition in a sense of, it's about opportunity cost. It's about focus. It's about what you're not going to do. And it's about the balance. So this is primarily a combat-driven game. It's primarily take objectives, win objectives, control objectives games. It's a unit-driven, unit-based in terms of, we'll get to the mechanics about how it works. It has very little downtime by deliberate intention. You don't move by nation. We move by unit. And that's because that's more of how the war was fought. You didn't send in one nation at a time. You sent in troops at a time, and you did it in layers and combined forces. So we built that in here. As far as the cards go, in terms of the assisted piece of this, you can see this. We've got a national support sort of phase. One of our phases is national support. And each nation has a set of cards that fall into 4 categories. The first is unit upgrade cards, which is represented by the 88 millimeter, by the flak gun here, in which your standard artillery for Germany would be upgraded. And this applies all of the artillery you'd have on the board at that time, as well as any new artillery that you would get during the resupply phase. So that's a unit upgrade card. So I put King George on here twice, which is fun. But we've also got, why not, right?
King George is a big man.
He is a big man. He gets 2 cards. Right. That's right. That was just a quick screen grab at the last second by me, so I apologize. But we have unique units, and so each nation has its own sense of unique units, which would have different pieces that you would introduce on the board. Because we all know there's some just some sheer joy of the tactile feel of putting something on the board that's different from the rest. It makes you feel like you're powerful, right? So we have unique units, and the cards introduce those for the Brits. It's the King George battleship. We have a Tiger tank, which we knew there were a few of, particularly in Tunisia at the time. That's a unique unit for the Germans. The U.S. have B-17s. And the Italian have the Alpini infantry and some others. So unique units is another one. Those are super powerful. And then we have event cards, which gets to certain things that happens, right? Casablanca, whether, the conference or, the uprisings that's going on. We have Vichy, right? That plays a role in events. This surrender, Mare Nostrum as a card for events. So each nation has those that the nation can introduce. As well as strategy cards, which are fundamentally logistics, engineering, counterintelligence, the things that add flavor to the game from a deploying your forces more strategically. So that's a long answer to your question of where cards fit. It is a card-assisted game, not a card-driven game. It's really balanced on fighting, where cards and events are used strategically at certain points of the game.
Okay, great. So I've got another question here, which is another great question from Jeff Beeler about what roles Spain and Turkey play in the game. Of course, historically, neither Spain nor Turkey participated in any meaningful way, in any official way in World War II, right? Neither became an actual belligerent. I think actually Turkey did join in very close to the end. But Franco kind of walked the knife's edge of kind of helping out the Axis, but saying, "Oh, we're not involved in this. We're just disinterested neutrals," even though we're allowing the German submarines to refuel in our ports and that kind of stuff. What role does Spain and or Turkey play? Is there an opportunity for them to be dragged into the contest as belligerents?
At this point, no. But you're absolutely right.
Expansion material.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, I mean, we can think about that sort of thing because that's what I mean. We're always learning new stuff. I mean, that's a valid question, and I'll tell you it's a good question though, in that we really had to think about other participants in this. I mean, so let me give you an example, right? I mean, it took the U.S. a while, right? And I believe Churchill was meeting with FDR when Tobruk fell, right? Tobruk was this magical defense. And when Britain did not get the help of the United States, it basically reached across the empire and took troops from India and took troops from all of its empire, right? And in Australia, right? I think the Australians were the ones that were critical to the defense of Tobruk. When
British always happy to fight to the last Australian or Indian or Scotsman or Welshman or Irish or whatever.
Or whatever, right? And I forget the number, but there were dozens of nations that contributed troops to Britain's effort when the U.S. said, and we're not going to really come in yet, right? And I think Churchill wasn't. So those are other nations potentially that could have a pretty big impact in terms of the mechanics of the game, of the outcome. So we made sort of the decision right now. Let's keep it to the 4 primary belligerents. So we didn't do that. And you're also right about Franco, right? He's like, yeah, I'm behind you, but I'm not really going to help you, right? I think Hitler asked him that question in 41 at some point, and he said, nah, not yet. So the short answer is they're not really in it.
Okay. I think that's a fair answer, actually. I think there was tremendous pressure on Franco from both sides, actually, to chip in and declare for one side or the other. And don't right. think that the Allies were not putting pressure on Franco as well, because they were. The Turks, short of Turkey being invaded, and who would do that really would probably be the Soviet Union. I think that when we start talking about Spain and or Turkey getting into World War II, then I think we are edging more deeply into what if alternate history type of territory than we would be in a standard war game that's trying to replicate one particular corner of the conflict.
Yeah. Gary, you make a fascinating point, actually, and something Seth and I were just talking about this morning is the balance between replication and gameplay. How do you incorporate that fun? Because I think part of what we've done is we bring you up to a point, whether that be November of 42 or July of 43. And at that point, this is designed to say, if you prosecute the war, how would you do it differently? So, of course, if you take Britain, you think, well, we've got a sea power, air power, we'll leave the land fighting to the U.S. Well, not necessarily. This a lot. Now, look, the mechanics and the resupply values are set up for certain ways to somehow thematically run in the same direction that history went. But it also gives you an opportunity to just rethink about how you'd want to do it, which we ultimately is a sort of design decision where you said, look, for the sake of fun and kind of recreating the history to a certain extent, how do we do that? So we kind of built that in versus staying strictly on script.
So I realize this may be a premature time to ask this question, but do you guys intend to have support for online play through things like, because this is another question that people are going to ask me, and I'm going to be like hemming and hawing about. I have no idea. So let's get you guys to say if you have support for, or at least plan to have support for online play via things like Vassal or Tabletop Simulator or what have you. Seth,
that's all you there.
Yeah, it is already set up and it's already in Tabletopia. It's not live on Tabletopia yet, but it will be shortly. We basically have to fulfill the get all the rules systems in place, and then that'll get to their approval process and be live at that point.
Okay, so Tabletopia is the target then.
Right.
Can't say I'm incredibly familiar with Tabletopia, largely because there's relatively few games that are in the space that I play in available on Tabletopia. Not zero, but not nearly as many as one finds on even on Tabletop Simulator, let alone Vassal, where it's it's the home of crazy, intricate text and counter stuff.
Right.
So, do you guys want to plug your graphic artists on the map? Because I think the map is quite pretty.
Well, you're talking to them, and that's Seth. I mean, we were joking. Thank you very much, by the way. We were joking last night about how many iterations this thing went. It's a good thing at the end of every file we don't put a version number because we wouldn't have enough characters. But yeah, this is all Seth, really.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was a very long process.
Okay. Did you guys start from an assumption that you were going to use an area movement map rather than a hex map or a point-to-point map and work from there? Or did you guys iterate on that with, did you try a hex map or point-to-point? I mean, topologically, these things might all end up being completely identical anyway, right? But it does make an aesthetic difference to players. Some players will prefer one type of map over another.
Right. Yeah, I think we basically always had we never went with a hex map. We always knew we wanted to go with this style of map with the different areas, the different territories. I think just mechanically we like the idea of having different spaces that give you different movement opportunities rather than the same movement opportunity at every particular hex. So that's pretty much what drove us there.
Okay.
And there's a lot of what sort of I would be lying if I said this was an intended effect. But one of the unintended and lucky effects of this is that we're always finding new ways to get to A to B on the map in order to, if you want to provide a defensive air cover with your fighters for an umbrella, there are ways to get through it. You push through it. This kind of map, or whatever type of those darker spaces. By the way, those are the shipping lanes, right? For the resupply values impacting the objectives. Different ways in order to control those or get to those. There's just a lot of surprises about what you can reach and what you can't reach that only needed to work the kinks out through gameplay, but it ended up being sort of an additive bonus we didn't intend.
Right.
I'm going to combine a couple questions from the audience here when I ask this question this way. To what extent are out of theater events, occurrences, campaigns modeled in Song for War? So say D-Day or the East Front. Is there a chance D-Day gets delayed and that has a rollover effect on the Mediterranean theater, or some catastrophe occurs on the Eastern Front that maybe affects the Mediterranean theater? To what extent is Song for War going to model or incorporate events that happen outside the theater?
Well, the event cards played by the different nations is where this happens. Again, if I shared how much time I've trolled through so many good old books and online to understand the right balance of events, but we've spent, for example, the multilateral agreements or the multinational agreements, the impacts on supplies coming from other locations. When things did not go well, when Hitler decided to divert forces from the Eastern Front to the Balkans. When Berlin decided to, again, to reinforce Greece, so we do have a lot of event cards that are in the hands of course, mostly the Allies, because a lot of the events were not in favor at that time in terms of where the trajectory was going. So that's basically through the cards. And part of that, again, this relates to the question of different nations taking part. We found when we started digging, that the Mediterranean theater was so rich and deep in its own interesting aspects that we ended up saying, well, let's stick with it and let's go deep rather than broad. And so we incorporated those to the event cards outside of the theater, but that's about it.
Okay, great. I'm just fixing the streams behind the scenes here again. It doesn't want to take anything as long as I'm fixing it. So, you guys have a whole presentation here, so let's see what else you have.
Sure, we can just talk about a few things. I think. Why don't we talk a little bit about sort of some of the mechanics that we think make it fun?
Yes.
So if you can see this is the core player aid in the game. A couple of things, and I think we started this. You asked us why we get into this, and the big reason why we got into this is certain things about larger theater games. That how can we create a game that's that is even more fun and takes away some of the I guess more frustrating things about some of the games you play in the world, right? Those being, for one, is teaming. Again, the war was fought by sides, right? By nations fighting together. So how do you create a mechanic that allows the UK and the US to deploy forces at the exact same time? How do you do that? How do you resolve combat? How do you take casualties? How do you decide what the casualties are? That's one thing, for example, when we approach this that we tried to address. Another one is downtime. And this related to the teaming piece is that you spend, a lot of time waiting for your nation, right? I mean, sure, you can have a lot of think time, but that didn't make a lot of sense to us. How do we could have cut out a lot of downtime from the games? You have to be out in front of things at all times, and you have something to do. With any game, Gary, right? The more people are standing around the table versus sitting, the better. So that's always an indicator for us. So downtime's an important one. And the last is, moving this idea of games where you end up, and I think the squad base took care of this, and if you were going to do a theater setting much larger, how do you get away from just giant clumps of pieces moving together? How do you do this in a more way that gives you joy about what can attack what?
I love giant clumps of pieces, giant walls of counters attacking other giant walls of counters.
Yeah, fair enough. But it feels like you're playing poker, when you're all in and you push all.
Yeah, it's like having a GM screen, except you're hiding behind your own stacks of counters.
That's exactly right. So maybe I guess it's all a matter of preference. It's all subjective. But so how do we introduce a little subtlety and nuance in this? There's infantry's got no business shooting down heavy bombers, right? So how do we incorporate some of these mechanics into the game? And the way we've done it is if you move from left to right and looking at this player aid, nothing in terms of the units themselves are going to surprise you. We don't get down into the deep of the specific, types of units. We don't rely on, there's no consumption in terms of ammo, and we don't get down to that level. The units on the left are going to look very familiar from land, sea, and air basis. You might see a little bit of different ones that you wouldn't see in other games, the incorporation of the air transport, for example, and different things. But what we've done is if you move from left to right, we've separated the units in terms of an armor rating, in terms of a firepower rating. The armor rating is basically three levels outside of the special one, which is the King George and the Tiger. But the armor rating is blue, yellow, and red, blue being the lightest, red being the heaviest. And it represents, of course, naturally, very intuitively, how difficult it is to destroy that particular unit. Now, the firepower rating, on the other hand, because firepower doesn't always necessarily correlate to defensive capability, right? I think artillery killed more men in the war than anything, right? But they're not the most, right? Up close, their armor's nothing, right? So how do you parse those out to make for a more interesting game? And the firepower is designed to do that. So blue, again, being the lightest, red being the heaviest. What you can see in the firepower rating is the symbol represents the types of enemy units it can hit and destroy, or defend against an attack. So if you look at infantry, for example, has a light firepower blue, needs a 9 or higher. We use D12s, by the way, 9 or higher on a D12. And because that green star in the middle, that indicates that it can only defend and attack against other land units, right? Which makes intuitive sense, but you don't always see that necessarily in these types of theater style games, right? So you have to be smart about where you use your infantry. And they have other abilities, right? Defensive capabilities in mountains. They can move. They're not particularly fast. And as you make your way down this, Gary, and I'm happy to stop and take a question or get some feedback or thoughts, all of these sort of have a different level of ability at firepower versus armor about what they can and cannot attack, which allows for, I think, a much more nuanced type of approach to how you deploy your forces.
So I assume you guys ran the statistical analysis part on the probability spread on the D12, which is an oddball choice.
Yep.
And I don't mind that. I kind of like to see interesting dice used, at least if they're, if at the PEDs, actually, I'm kind of a big snob about this. If there are like special dice for like an RPG, then I don't like that I need to go buy the special dice to play the RPG. But for a war game, that doesn't bother me because you get them in the game, you keep them in the box, and that's that. But on the other hand, I've got a drawer full of D12s, so just finding more extra D12s is not going to be a problem. Did you guys find that you had to do any extra legwork to make the probability spread on D12s work for the game, or did it just kind of naturally fall into place?
I can't see Seth's face, but I'm sure the excitement is brimming over. So, Seth,
probability,
yeah.
Yeah. So we did spend quite a bit of time talking about this and looking at different ideas. The D12 kind of fit in a sweet spot, in our opinion, of not being a ridiculous number of different values. You get a D20 and you got so many 20 different options. It's a nice sweet spot, we think, of having enough variability where one number difference, you have that 8% difference of an ability to hit or defend. It makes a difference in the game versus it's not too much, it's not too little. We just felt like it was a a good middle ground, and it's a relatively common die as well for manufacturing. It's not something crazy or oddball. It's something that would be relatively cheap to manufacture. So
yeah, you get them. You can get them at Target. So,
are we still here, Gary?
Did we lose you?
Yep. Looks like we've got some lag on the StreamYard side, but you guys are both still here.
We're here.
I think it might be on your side actually.
Okay.
If you guys
Okay.
are
Good.
streaming from the same place, but it was just a little bit laggy for a second. I was saying it is to touch on your point, Seth. It's very easy to find G12s now. You can get them from Amazon. They have them at Target. So, which I found.
Right.
Oh, they got D&D dice at Target now here at Christmas time. So that was neat. Do we? I don't know if we have I don't know to what extent we have the capability to do like a little mini combat walkthrough or talk through in the context of what we have available for us here today. But can we talk about how the combats work?
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay, Gary?
Yeah, I can.
Awesome. So, it was from a combat. So now that's great when you look at the units, but the question is how do you fix this in the mechanics for better gameplay? And by the way, interject at any time if things get laggy and you need me to take a second.
Your video's a little laggy. Your audio is fine, and that's
awesome.
Usually all. That's all we really need here.
Okay. Well, if you can see the movement steps here on the right-hand side of the player aid, this is sort of the core mechanic of the game. Rather than move by nation, we move by unit. And not every individual unit, but what's funny is an interesting connection. And if you've ever played that, they have a very interesting initiative.
Now we're lagging out a bit, unfortunately.
We're in that regard, firepower. They move sooner and they go fast, and they move more often. Right? Fighters should be mobile. They should be quick. They should clear airspace early. Subs should be mobile. Right? They should be able to clear out sea spaces and they should be able to strike and go. So how do we incorporate those pieces? So the way we do it is we do it in movement steps. In movement step 1, fighters and submarines are the first to make their move. And the way it works is, the allies are the aggressors. So in this case, the allies would all move all of their fighters and subs together, Brits and Americans. And you have to think about how do we want to do together? What do we want to accomplish? And so in terms of clearing airspace or clearing out sea spaces or doing the things you need to do to prosecute your plan. And then after that, the Axis get a chance to sort of move their fighters and subs and declare any battles and resolve those battles. Then we go from step to step. Allies first, followed by the Axis throughout stage 1. Stage 2 is about
We are now dropping audio.
And that's combined forces. That's the war. But you have to do it together as a nation. So these mechanics and the movements are designed to emulate that. So that you're thinking about the layers of how you would execute this, similar to how the war was fought. But more importantly, you're doing it together.
Did we lose for a couple of seconds, Gary?
Yeah, we dropped a bit of audio there. I think the gist of that, you did get across, but so I think, and correct me if I'm misstating anything here, but it sounds like you have sort of two stages in the combat process. You have, or the turn process. You have the movement step and the battle step, and then you, based on what we see on the chart here. So in movement step 1, you move fighters and submarines. In movement step 2, you move fighters and a bunch of other air assets plus a couple other things. In step 3, you move, big ships up to battleships. Step 4, you move this other land stuff. And then in step 6, and some of these units appear multiple times in multiple movement steps, right? That's what it looks like.
Yes.
So you're moving, say, fighters in step 1, step 2, and step 6, whereas you're only moving battleships once in step 3, for example.
Correct.
Okay, and then they're each of those steps, they're moving that movement rating.
Correct.
Yep. So where a fighter is move 4, I'm moving it 4 spaces in step 1, 4 spaces in step 2, and 4 spaces in step 6. So that seems to give fighters a great deal of movability. That reminds me to ask though, what is the turn scale? What does a turn represent time wise? Either
Seth,
you
wanna
guys are
answer? I'm
baffled
not-
by
just
that
make sure you
question,
can hear me
or,
okay.
No. I was waiting for Chris to answer, but it looks like it didn't come through on his end. Yeah, he was saying earlier, we didn't really scale it out a stage to be a specific number of months, but if you do align it, it's about 4 to 6 months per stage.
Okay, so those kinds of that kind of amount of movability seems to make sense then, if we're reflecting units that have 4 to 6 months to move around. So the turns represent a lengthy period of time. They're not like monthly turns or bi-weekly turns or weekly turns if you're playing War in Europe, for example.
Yeah.
So and then I noticed that there are battle steps too, and so it looks like you conduct the battles in a similar way, where certain units looks like either AA or artillery fires in step 1, and then you fire the step 2 units, then you fire the step 3 units, so on and so forth.
Correct.
Right.
That's correct.
Can you guys hear me okay? Because I stopped my camera simply to create a little bandwidth.
Right now it seems fine. Yeah.
Great. I think maybe, as you said, audio trumps video necessarily. So to answer your question, that's correct. When you move units, fundamentally, faster, lighter move more often, and heavier move more slowly. But ultimately,
oh boy,
can you hear me okay? But ultimately,
yeah,
when you execute the fight, you have to do this in battle steps as well. Not everything would fight at the same time.
Okay, we may be looking at a Chris laptop problem, because Seth, you're coming right now. At least you're coming in completely fine. Looks like
okay.
Yeah, Brant's saying
Seth,
they had some problems yesterday, but that's going to be a Discord bandwidth issue or a local bandwidth issue, one or the other.
Oh, okay.
It is absolutely, as you guys are probably aware, it is absolutely possible to pinpoint this, but I'm not running trace routes on anything right now while we're trying to do this. So, so we'll hopefully just have to fight our way through it.
Okay.
So, now that you guys are kind of entering the home stretch for A Song for War specifically, is there a next project that you have in mind, an expansion for this or another game? If so, is that gonna, do you guys feel like this system is robust enough to tackle different topics, like say the Pacific?
Yeah, Chris, are you still on? Or are you?
No.
Okay. Yeah, we talked about this quite a bit.
He's got Cleveland internet.
He's got Cleveland. Actually, if you just want to come in the other room, Chris, we can just go on the same laptop, if this one seems to be working.
There we go.
We could do
we're gonna wing this.
We could do 2 dudes on a love seat,
That works.
You just want to go over this. There you go.
There we go.
Yeah, we had talked about this quite a bit. We'd love to use the same system in future World War II scenarios, going Pacific, going Normandy, whatever. But we'd also talked about going into like a medieval scenario, fantasy scenario. We don't see a lot of games in that as well. We love that format, that premise. So yeah, quite a bit of things we were talking about moving into if we have the opportunity.
Yep. Application of the mechanics allows us to think about different theaters for sure. And we find whether you're talking about Battle Britain, whether you're talking about Pacific Theater, whether you're talking about Eastern Front, heck, you could do a lot of different things with this theater-wise that provide us new opportunities. And we're always open to feedback and input of what folks think we should do, for sure.
Well, from a 1,000-yard perspective from where I'm sitting, I mean, it's you've got a game that seems to model, air, land, naval conflict in this theater, and that's kind of what the Pacific's about too. And then, on the other hand, if you try to do East Front with it, then you'd end up with this overwhelmingly land game that might, I mean, I'm just talking, but that might represent a bigger challenge to adapt this same system than it would to be to say the Pacific, which sounds pretty interesting actually as a potential topic. Looking at the chat, looks like oh, it's a Brant hillbilly internet connection is what we're talking about, actually. So, and I've got people from the audience saying everything's been great. So,
okay.
What else do I have here? So did we visually drop Chris?
Oh, I'm here.
He's just OCDing with some lighting issues over here. If you want to turn up there.
I feel like your video is completely fine, to be honest. Okay. So, By the way, my long-awaited new webcam is allegedly arriving today. We'll see if that's actually going to happen. It's been delayed by about 2 weeks so far. So we've already talked about. So we do have a question from the audience here that Jeff asks about evolving capabilities. So as we probably know, there are some shifts in the capabilities of the various combatants as we proceed, through the timeline that the game reflects, right? So I'm going to guess, correct me if I'm right or wrong here, that probably these are event card modeled, right? You've got, and actually that's a good question. So does the deck evolve as the game proceeds, or do you just start with the deck and that's the deck?
Right. You just start with the deck and that's the deck.
It's the latter. But there's the way the mechanics work. Again, it's always a game of choice in what you're not going to do, and the use of certain national support points to activate certain things that would help you. Our general view is that we find it, an irritating thing about games is, really stinky cards. All of them are good. So the question is, if they're all good and they're all going to be fun to play, which one are you going to choose? You'll only see, even in the full campaign game, you'll only see 12 of them, right, Seth?
Right.
12 out of
16.
Out of 16 maximum at any given game. So to answer your question, the deck does not evolve, but it does give you a lot of choice. And you'll only play 4 or 5 at a given time, so there's a lot of replay value of a piece of that. In terms of the you were talking about units, I think, and upgrades and capabilities. Is that correct as well?
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've worked that into through painstaking time in old school encyclopedias, as well as Lord knows how many websites over the years, to figure out what type of upgrades we want. So, whether, the Brits, with battle class destroyers and, in QF anti-air, or Matilda tank upgrades, or you're the Germans and you're dealing with Stukas or the 8088s, or we have all of that built in as upgrades that are optional. US, same thing, right? Shermans, the B-17 is a unique unit, bazookas, lots of different things. The US are very logistics based. C-47 Skytrain, all of these things that sort of would make the war and change the dynamic of how you would do it. They all have it. Italian, same thing. Some event days, and all kinds of different things that were unique to the theater, but also allow you to upgrade and prosecute the war a little differently.
So that raises another question. That brings another question to mind. Is you mentioned that the C-47s, and we've already talked about the Tigers as a specialist unit. What kinds of other things did you guys include in the design or in the aesthetics of the design? Kind of just really as kind of flavor to kind of give you the sense of, hey, this is World War II in the Med that we're fighting out.
That's an interesting question. I mean, aside from trying to be, without being maniacally controlling about this, which is, not next to my nature, as Seth has pointed out, but trying to at least stick to, units that had played a relatively important role in the Mediterranean theater itself. I mean, other than that, of basically always staying in the Mediterranean ballpark in the time period, whether that be an external event, whether that be an upgrade, whether that be a unique unit, but not for the sake of complete accuracy, for the sake of gameplay.
Right.
It's kind of how we balance that out. But nothing in the game, for the most part, or let me flip that, everything that you'll see is at least going to have some kind of tie to the time period and to the theater, nothing else. So that if we ever did do a different version, you're going to see very different things, relative to that theater. I think that allows for the variability in the future.
That actually does answer my question. And I'm so Jeff asked, are the units generic or named units, which is cool. Specifically, I think what he's asking is, do the battleships and aircraft carriers have names on them?
There is I've spent an inordinate amount of time thinking about the U.S. upgrade for the aircraft carrier. We ended up going with the Ranger class, but they don't have the specific names. We went with classes to the extent that the King George class, and then the Ranger class for the aircraft carrier. And there are other names. I mean, there's the Zara, right? I think that's what it's called, right?
Right, Zara, Littorio.
Right, the Littorio. So those do actually. So classes appear, Jeff, not necessarily, ship names in particular.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, and again, correct me if this is wrong, but the ground units are going to represent sort of an abstract number of men or units or assets or whatever, right? So it sounds like you haven't said an armor unit is 265 tanks, for example, where the bigger naval units or even the air units represent, an air squadron or an air fleet or whatever, or a Kampfgeschwader as it were. But where the big ships may in fact represent a battleship, right? I mean, how many battleships were involved in the war in the Med? That number is not on all sides. That number is not astronomical. And it's probably roughly equivalent to the number of battleship pieces you guys have available in the game, right?
Right. That's probably fair.
Yeah,
right.
And that's one of the sort of like, I guess we would call it, trade-offs you make,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right. Lord knows there's still a lot of pieces in this game, but it's not, you're right. And one of the trade-offs is Navy, right? I mean, how many major German battleships appeared in the Mediterranean? Okay. Yes. But, so just for the sake, yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. Once you get to that, you have to make some trade-offs, right? So when the Germans are dropping a battleship into the Mediterranean, history is, maybe his feathers are ruffled a little bit, but ultimately it makes it a more fun game.
Yeah. I mean, we could get pretty far deep into the weeds with that. Just asking the question about German battleships, which German ships qualified as battleships? Was it just the Bismarck and the Tirpitz, or was, say, the Scharnhorst, which was considerably smaller, or even the Graf Spee, which was not considered a battleship at any point, but it fulfilled it ran some of the missions that one might expect a battleship to have performed at various times. So, and I'm not sure any of those ships ever showed up in the Mediterranean. Certainly the Bismarck and the Tirpitz did not. So, I mean, you could get fairly far into the weeds as far as the, historical participants did about, look at the Anglo-German naval treaty and then look at the German history of trying to, build ships around the limitations of that Anglo-German naval treaty, or for that matter, the Japanese did the same thing. So we could get kind of into, I think, well below the scale of the game we're talking about in determining exactly what constitutes a battleship versus an armored cruiser or what have you.
Right. There's a slippery slopes on that. And so I think, again, from a design standpoint, you think what ultimately, and I think there's a lot of fun in that in certain different types of games that could be had. But ours, we stuck to classes and we stuck to, we get a lot of this feedback saying, I really want to do this again because I would have done this differently, or I would have done A, I would have done B. It's about making the moves, the opportunity costs and the payoff and the layers at the expense of sometimes of complete historical accuracy or the depth of names or consumption or those kind of things, for sure.
Well, certainly, there are alternatives for somebody that wants, a specifically named, division-sized units. But I think that's not what you guys were shooting for, and I think that's a reasonable design decision, given the scale of what we're talking about. So to answer Jeff, go play Europa, and you'll be all set with its set of Baroque naval rules to represent Malta and all that. Oh my God, I'm not just threatening to have a show with me complaining for at least half an hour on Europa. That will happen, but probably not till we're done with our current campaign, which probably isn't going to be for another month or so. So, but yeah, this looks very promising, very interesting. I think it's gonna have a lot of broad appeal, but that leads me into another question, which is, I mean, I think it's already obvious that one of the things that distinguishes Song for War is its choice to be in the Mediterranean theater, right? Between from a game like an Axis and Allies, whatever, right? There's a million of them at this point, even with zombies. So what other features are going to set Song for War apart from those much better marketed games that are put out by big boys like Hasbro? By the way, Wizards of the Coast makes more money for Hasbro than the Hasbro toys do as of last year.
I did not know that.
Very interesting. Yeah. So, but I still have the question. So, how are you guys going to sort of emphasize the fact that this is not just an Axis and Allies clone, right? From a presentation standpoint, to me, it sounds different enough. But that's once we're a little ways into the rules, it's fairly obvious. But how do you position yourselves as being an alternative to or superior to
I think
those?
We lost you again, Gary.
Oh, well, I'm coming through loud and clear on my side. So let me restart the question.
I think we lost you on our side.
Okay, that may be.
I think
you
I got
guys
it.
are
Actually,
coming in.
The difference between Axis and Allies.
You guys are coming in fine for me. So
okay,
so yeah, just differences between Song for War and Axis and Allies.
Okay, so you've hit the crux of the question. That sort of was the origin for a lot of this. To be honest, I think the primary differences are that game mechanics, the ability to team together with nations, the fact that not to put too fine a point on it, but not every unit can kill every unit. That drives me a little bonkers. The variability of movement, the openness of the theater, right? You can resupply forward points. You can take objectives and resupply there and not resupply at others. If the Allies take Palermo, resupply there. If the Allies can make their way to the Balkans, resupply there. It's a much more fluid, open approach that allows the nations to team together, fight together, die together, combine forces together, just like they did in the war, and it has a lot of differences in terms of depth of upgrades and technology and units as well. I think those are the primary differences. Getting those across come in the gameplay. So we have a larger marketing challenge on our hand, I think, about how we think about this. But ultimately, anyone that's played it or play tested says it's very different in play and feel in terms of engagement.
Okay. I mean, I'm satisfied with having talked to you guys some and having seen it on a table. I'm pretty satisfied that it is more than different enough from Axis and Allies, but it's still kind of, that's going to be the competition, right? I think you guys are kind of rolling in a space that's potentially a lot bigger than the standard, Ardwulf's Lair library war game, right? Where we got, people that were running down ancient copies of SPI classic giant monster games.
You hit the nail on the head. That's exactly correct.
So on the topic, since I brought up monster games, what's the required footprint for this? Because the map's pretty big, as I recall.
In terms of like table size?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd probably need a decent 6-foot table to play it on.
Yeah. I mean, you saw the map. I mean, it's we didn't skimp on map size because of that. That's another thing I think it really helped to pop and get attention. So we always get comments on it. So
for practicality, there's only so many units you can fit on this tiny little space. It just makes it more practical having it bigger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it definitely did help it jump out at Origins too. It made it much more obvious that you guys were playing a big shiny thing rather than Pax Pamir that happens on this tiny little map, for example. So it's quite photogenic. I felt.
Maybe that's more of a reflection of our age than anything. I got to be able to see stuff.
Yeah, right.
Better, so.
I can't see anything.
Oh,
exactly.
Tell me about it. Yeah, that's becoming an increase. I always kind of poo-poo, as somebody gaming in his 20s and 30s, I always poo-pooed that. But no, that's a legitimate concern at where now somebody gaming in his 50s. Yeah, that's now a problem.
That's exactly right.
There's a lot of
exactly.
A lot of that happening.
The trifocals for this, right? The modern term of the progressives, which just makes us all feel better for people that have these, but that's like
6-foot table. This is small potatoes, Mo. What are you talking about? I think on a standard folding table, as again, I'm pulling this from memory. I think that a standard 2.5-foot wide folding table is not going to be big enough for your map, but lengthwise, I think it's probably big enough. So if you got two of those 2.5 by 6 folding tables or a decent sized dining room table, I think it does. Having seen this setup, I think it does fit.
Yeah.
Let me
it does.
John Madison's. Okay. I mean, I would think so. That's that's going to be that's a practical concern, right? And it's honestly one of the reasons why a game like Jaws of Victory might draw a smaller audience is because of, it's got a big footprint, right? So that's, something that you got to think about. Let me ask you guys John Madison's question. I know you have an upcoming, what I think is going to be Kickstarter. Can you speak to your approach with that Kickstarter and with your crowdfunding campaign? And do you have any advice for anybody else having gone at least some distance down that path already?
That's a valid question, Seth.
It's always hilarious to us because this has been a couple of times now where people have come to us and asked us for advice on like Kickstarter and developing games, and it's just hilarious because we have absolutely no idea. I mean, obviously, but this is our first foray into it, and we can tell you all the things that we did wrong, which is everything up to this point, and we can go over that. And you can laugh at us, but in terms of the point that you're getting to with like Kickstarter and advertising, that's actually the hurdle we're at to jump right now, trying to figure out what's our best marketing avenue, what kind of ads are we going to run, what kind of ad campaign we're going to run, getting the Kickstarter, out there and visible. We're still trying to jump that hurdle ourselves. And we're talking with different people trying to get some ideas together, but we haven't quite tackled that yet.
And there isn't a real true, I think, yet. Well, maybe there is, but we're maybe I'm questioning it and not trusting it. But in terms of a true set of reliable guidelines on the efficacy of certain avenues, the use of the video in the Kickstarter page versus not, the length, do you have to have the 42 add-ons in which you have to scroll down forever? Some people love it. So there's a lot of it. It depends on the audience. So it takes to provide an answer to your question is through a combination of luck and making every pitfall mistake that one would make, we're sort of working through it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I see where you guys are coming from. I mean, this is a, crowdfunding as a general topic, not even just in gaming. It has been, a thing that a lot of people have frankly choked on, right? It's, people have hugely successful looking Kickstarters. They brought in a large total number of dollars, but then they somehow ran out of money in final production. And this happened to somebody in the gaming space too, where they got all the money they need, everything's printed, but they ran out of money like as soon as they hit the warehouse, and they don't have the money to ship anything. So they've had to go back to their backers and say, we're going to have to charge you additional shipping so we can ship it out to you. We're sorry about that.
Yeah, that we have spent a lot of time thinking about that balance and modeling out scenarios of the embedded costs of warehousing to fulfillment to all of the types of things, the pandemic and the impact on supply chain costs.
Right.
There's a lot of things that are creating a moving target for this. So we've modeled this out a few times and thinking, if we get this completely wrong, yeah, right. If we get this completely wrong, what's the worst likely case scenario that we want to avoid? And if we get this completely wrong,
yeah, exactly. Worst case is we're doing hard time. Yeah,
yeah, right.
So it could have gone better. What are you gonna do? Live and learn.
I had a slide on that. I had a prison slide, but yeah.
Yeah, please don't become the next HMS GRD. Where I think John's going with his line of questioning.
John, that's true.
And a lot of folk, a number of Kickstarters have gotten into big trouble on international sales too, because they didn't correctly calculate for shipping. And of course, right now, a lot of calculations that may have happened 2 years ago may be completely off the reservation now because of the realities of shipping when we still have a worldwide plague going on. So, and I guess let me ask, do you guys feel like the pandemic has slowed you down at all in development or time or release timing or anything like that?
For sure. I mean, not necessarily in development, because Chris and I have had, we have access to each other all the time, but definitely on the playtesting side, we just not having the ability to go out and play it with the gamer group or even play it among our own groups for a long time there, because we were all on lockdown for such a long time. So we definitely did lose a lot of time just on the playtesting end of things, which set us back probably easily, a year and a half or more.
And Tabletopia works fine. It's great, but there's something we were just talking about this morning that there's just, you get a lot, 60% of communication is nonverbal. When you're sitting across from someone and you can read that body language, he's saying he likes it, but there's something bothering him. I can elicit that feedback, so we really miss out on that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, most of my communication comes in grunts and moans. So at this point, and complaining.
There you go.
I guess just as this isn't really a question, but Henry points out that Flying Pig is doing or is about to start a Kickstarter for Old School Tactical, but they're not shipping internationally apparently, that's a huge heavy box. And you guys are also going to be a huge heavy box, actually.
Yeah, you've seen that sucker, right? I mean, it's going to be ballpark of how many pieces?
Right now there's about 480 pieces in the game, and obviously the big map and player, and so it's not light and it's not small. That's it. That's a good shot of the whole spiel there.
There you go.
But we are going to be going with a pledge manager, so shipping will be done in real time at the time of shipping, so we won't have to worry about guessing and hoping we're right and not too heavy and not too light on it. So that will aid in that.
And back to your footprint point, what's interesting, and I mean, this probably comes as maybe a shock, but we really haven't played War Room yet. And so in looking at that, but there's so much stuff in that box, I mean, while we maybe have a footprint outside of the game board for us and the player aids, we try to let the mechanics sort of work in and of themselves without a lot of stuff around the board. That's just generally our philosophy. Now, most people say, well, give me more. Again, this is all about preference. But our general style is pieces, player aid, cards, board, and let the mechanics work through themselves that way without having taking all the pieces off and putting them on a separate board or doing it right. We just didn't go with that approach.
Right. There's not a lot of extra room you would need.
Right.
Let me ask. I think I have only one more question, and I'm gonna ask the folks watching if you have more questions. We're gonna start entering the home stretch here, I think. So ask your questions if you have them. I'm gonna ask about solo ability, because this is another one that people are in a month. People are gonna ask me, "Hey, what about Sonic for Wars? Can you do that solitaire?" Blah 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 blah. And I'm gonna have no idea if I didn't ask the question. So have you guys given any thought to that? Is it something is there a bot by or a mechanism by which you can solitaire this thing, and if not, how well does it work if you decide to just solitaire it, playing all the sides yourself?
We did think about that quite a bit, because we do know that's a big ask. There are a lot of people that really enjoy solitaire play. Right now there is no bot, there is no AI, there is no ability to play it in solo mode. You could play all the sides if you wanted to, if that is your prerogative. But there's no special consideration for that. It would just be, you're playing all the sides. We were thinking about at some point making an AI for it. But like I said, at this point, there isn't anything in the works.
Okay, fair enough. All right, let me ask another question that comes up because I pulled this particular picture up. Are you guys going to ship with these fancy unit trays too?
Those are just. They will have trays. That's a shot of the current prototype. So those are just cardboard
Believe it or
trays.
not.
The actual production trays will be plastic with clear lids on them. But yeah, they will ship with trays.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it just makes it so much easier. You open the lid and it's all there. You put it on the table. There's no real screwing around with it. So it's just easy.
Right. Yeah, that ship with their own storage solution. Big fan of that.
Yeah. Oh, please.
So are we.
So are we. I mean, listen. I know there's more cost, but it's well worth it.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, then, as I continue to come up with questions here, do you guys have a price point in mind? If your answer is you haven't settled that yet, then I think that's fine. But I'll ask. Do you guys have a price in mind?
We have it's a little bit going to be there's going to be an asterisk next to this because of the current issue with pandemic and shipping and supply lines and whatnot. We're trying to get into the 80 to 90 range is where we like to be for a Kickstarter price. But we'll just have to see what ends up being the case once we finally hit, because it just changes all the time at this point. There's no real solid stake in the ground of this is what it's going to be 3 months from now.
Yeah, but philosophically, Gary, to answer your question, we're not of a mindset of saying, some inordinate high level price for what we consider to be, Cadillac of games. We think it's great, but we think it should also be an accessible price point, frankly.
Right.
Well, I'd certainly call 80 or 90 an accessible price point for something of this mass.
Yeah.
So
that's the idea. Value,
right.
Fun and value. That's the idea. How do we get there and still, put out a profitable product that we can reinvest any capital and figure out how to get on stage?
Yeah.
Right.
New edition of Eclipse, for example, I think MSRP $250. It's crazy. So that price point sounds gangbusters to me. So Brant is butting in at the last minute to ask that whether you guys had anything that you had to change significantly once it started hitting tables. He's asking about Origins playtesting specifically, but I'll ask more generally. What kinds of big changes did you guys find that you had to make as a result of your playtesting?
Go ahead.
That's a good one. I'll say this every time. There's, obviously they're becoming smaller and smaller in terms of the tweaks, but every time we get some good feedback, I think probably the biggest thing we took from Origins, one of them was, to be clear, is fixing cruisers.
We had great feedback about cruisers, and it's just one of those things. Like, he and I have played the game for a bazillion times, and we played with other people, almost as many times, and you look at units a certain way. You always think about them that way, and then seeing them through someone else's perspective is really interesting. And the point came up of these people didn't see the value proposition for cruisers. Like, this cost doesn't make what this costs, and this ability range. I don't know that I buy them. And they had a lot of valid points of what else should this be doing to make it more useful? And we added a lot of those changes in the most current revision of the game.
Mm-hmm. And the Navy went through some really important material tweaks that ultimately, I think, made for a much more sort of fun, dynamic, and value proposition, because this should be a game of fun choices and a little bit of regret that you didn't choose A when you chose B, right? So how do we build that in? So the feedback we got on the Navy was probably big. We've gotten good feedback on resupply, firepower, all kind of aspects over the course of the time period, though.
Yeah, we got some good feedback on why isn't on the player aid, why isn't the air on the top and the land on the bottom, because that's how it goes on the movement steps. So that's a great idea. Never thought of that.
Giant no duh moment, but thank you for that. Yeah.
So a lot of good stuff.
I'm always stunned. This happens a lot in the Hex Encounter wargame space of player aids that even if the game works great, the player aids maybe are not fully baked when the game gets launched, because generally speaking, that's not something that the playtesters were looking for. So
it's a pet peeve. It's a pet peeve, right? Because that's the thing I'm going to look at most, other than the board. Right. It has to be efficient. It has to get me from A to B quickly, because if it's overly administrative, or if I have to work more, it's just not fun.
I like paperwork in my games. How about you guys? I love looking through pages.
And let me give you an example too. I just don't feel the need to actually have a resource that I have to pull out of a tray, put in front of me, and then put back in the tray every single time, and then re-pull it out. We could do the math in our heads. We're all fairly competent. Let's make the math simple, but make it elegant, so that you know that you are expending resources and resupplying whatever you're doing without having to have the manufacturing costs or the administrative burden of doing so. Stuff like that is a big guideline for us in terms of how we build this stuff.
I mean, that makes sense to me. I wasn't kidding about the paperwork. I like paperwork. However, I'm in a minority on that. So
you are.
So I'm a natural born accountant, apparently.
Well, we'll make a Gary edition with all kinds of paper in it.
Okay. Well, I can make my own paperwork if necessary. I've done it before. So as Brant points out, this is absolutely right. And this is a really interesting way to frame this. It's not really a question, but really interesting statement is that these play aids between, the tactile elements of the game, the pieces, the displays, the map, the player aids, whatever, are all user interface. And a lot of game design groups, even from, inside the relatively smaller Hex Encounter wargaming hobby, a lot of folks are not thinking in those terms. So it's always nice to see it when that is a consideration, and when those folks thought of their play aids and their, the way the map is laid out and all that stuff as a user interface. So
it is very easy. Is it very easy to fall on a slippery slope of not staying audience and user driven on this stuff? Mm-hmm. You just get lost in this bubble of design, and it's very simple. And that's why the guy said, "We'll put air at the top." I mean, we missed that. I mean, it can happen. It just happens.
Yeah.
So actually, let me ask about your playtest process. Did you guys have send it out to external playtesters, or did you guys just do all the playtesting yourselves, or coordinate all the playtesting yourselves? How big was your pool of playtesters?
Yeah, so it was
Your pool?
Early on. It was basically ourselves and our we have our own gamer groups that we just friends that we have, and we played through them. And then from there, we branched out into origins, different conventions, different gamer groups, different. He's in Cleveland. We have different circles that we run with. But like I said, with pandemic, we were kind of limited to those circles, and then Tabletopia, and that's been the bulk of our playtesting up until now.
We've done a couple with some overseas folks, just to try to get a diversity of perspective. Hardcore gamers, war gamers, non-war gamers. Folks that here's interesting. When we went to, for example, my son is helping us on our social media side because I'm fundamentally inept, but and a lot of his friends have play tested it as well. And we actually did a presentation at here in Cleveland at the Cleveland Institute of Art for some students there, because we were trying to find a way to get some creative input for the game. And we were standing in front of a classroom of 20 college sophomores at an art school, and they were clamoring to play it, and we were just literally shocked. So we went through the process of expanding to different groups within some college groups too, and pleasantly surprised to try to beat this up from the playtest pool.
That's actually awesome. Art school students clamoring to play. I mean, that's worse than Twilight Struggle players.
Yeah, I mean, well, what was fascinating, the story goes, is that you can work with what they do is they work with companies, and then they give their students assignments to help with creative design around the elements, right? And so, you're basically helping educate the world, and you're also getting in exchange relatively free help around this kind of stuff. And what was interesting is the other presenters that day were Fortune 500s, global, and then they think, hey, so here's whatever after Ford, let's talk to Invictor X Games. We're like, so hey everybody, but it was very popular, so we were pleasantly surprised, and that kind of entered our thinking about testing as well.
Okay, great. Brent at Mass mentions last night's game session. How did that go, and is there another one planned for this weekend?
Yeah, there's one more today at I think it's at 2:00 this afternoon.
Yeah.
Okay.
It went well last night. We only had two out of the four show up, but Chris and I ran the other side. So, but it went pretty well.
Yeah, it went really well. And one of the guys from Cleveland. So go figure. Yeah. So it's all all homers, Gary.
Yeah, good. It's, well, as we all know, we are in the heartland of tabletop gaming here in the near Midwest, as it were, between Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Michigan. There's just an enormous amount of tabletop play happening here, and a lot of war game stuff going on in Ohio in general. It's just, you gotta sometimes struggle to get all those crotchety old hairy guys in the same room at the same time.
Yeah.
All right.
Doesn't sound like a hoot.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna wrap this up. Thanks to Chris and Seth for sitting down for this interview. Do stay tuned, because I'm gonna badger them about coming back on the show later on for more content, maybe sitting down in a live setting. There is, as we mentioned, another Song for War event. I'm looking at the schedule right now for 2 p.m. and it looks like there's a slot available there. So if you're interested in giving this a whirl, sign up for that. And if you're sign up EE for the convention, you can of course keep an eye on it, even if you're not necessarily playing yourselves. And I'd like to thank everybody, despite the technical problems that we had, which I think what we had is I had 2 interview sessions set up in StreamYard, and I signed into the right one, but YouTube picked it up as the wrong one. So it was picking up as the later Catastrophe Games interview rather than the earlier Song for War interview. So I don't think it's my fault in this case, but I guess it doesn't matter. It doesn't. I'm taking the blame for it one way or the other. So once again, thanks to Chris and Seth, thanks to Brant for setting this all up. So we actually finally got me and you guys in the same room at the same time, despite my general disorganization. And we'll talk to everybody again soon. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.